Alright guys, welcome back to the garden, and today's video is all about Swiss chard. So here we have a Swiss chard bed. So you might remember this bed from the video about beetroots, because we planted them in the same bed and there are still some beetroots left in between the Swiss chard. So if you are a beginner gardener, I recommend growing Swiss chard because it's probably the easiest vegetable that you can grow, even easier than radishes. Takes probably a little bit longer to grow, but in about 2 months you're gonna be eating some nice Swiss chard leaf. And why is it the easiest vegetable to grow? That's because the pests are not eating the leaves at all, almost. I don't know why, but this Swiss chard is so much resistant to insects, and I see only few leaves where the insects are eating, unlike the brassicas like broccoli and you know, cauliflower, cabbages. These are just getting eaten alive, and especially potatoes. So pretty much potatoes and tomatoes are the hardest vegetable to grow. They take the most of our effort, and this, I don't remember doing anything with it at all. And once the Swiss chard starts growing like this in a raised bed, the weeding takes kind of care of itself. So I would space them apart maybe 10 centimeters. You can experiment with even less, so you can really grow them in a high density, and that takes care of the weeding pretty much. I wouldn't plant them together with the beetroots though, because beetroots is a root vegetable, so they don't need so much nitrogen. And actually, if you give them more nitrogen, they're just gonna focus on growing leaves. So that's what the Swiss chard needs. It's pretty much using it for the leaves, not for the roots. So Swiss chard would need more nitrogen, so using your urine is an excellent idea for this. And just pee in a bottle, and every morning you can just pour it over here. And as you can see, we have only Swiss chard and broccoli here, and on this side we have the kale still surviving. And over here we have some carrots. This is the leek. So here we're growing some red leaf Swiss chard. So as you can see, they're having this red stem. It's really nice, but I guess it has the same flavor. It just looks different, maybe has a different nutrient profile a little bit. So in this bed we're growing the peppers, but as you can see, they didn't survive the frost. So peppers, tomatoes, especially tomatoes, tomatoes don't survive even a lighter frost. So if it's like around 0 degrees, they're all gonna die. And here we had more cherry tomatoes, but as you can see, broccoli and Brussels sprouts are still surviving, but they're not producing much flowers. You know, they're kind of dry. They can survive the frost, but they're not gonna produce much after that. So I'm not sure if there is a point keeping them here. Carrots can, I think, survive the winter just fine here. Here we have some nettles. Of course, the kale is probably the most cold hardy. And I think these guys can also survive the winter. Some of the leaves are gonna die out, and they're just gonna kind of survive the smallest leaves over here. Alright, so when is the best time to plant the Swiss chard? In my experience, the best time to plant them is in early spring. I think they can withstand even lower temperatures when they start growing. So you don't have to wait until, you know, May or June to plant them like other vegetables like zucchinis or melons, you know, pumpkins. These guys, they can withstand, as you can see, even frost. But when you're growing them, I would not risk them to plant them before the frost. But after your last expected frost date, which here is in about I think late April. But yeah, that's when we're gonna plant them. Just gonna grow much bigger leaves than you can see here. I think these guys were growing till about here, and once you have a lot of leaves like that, the best way to preserve them is to just freeze them. But first you wanna slightly steam them, because if you have big leaves like that, they will take a lot of space. But if you just lightly steam them, they get much smaller, and then you can use the water from the steaming for as a vegetable broth for making soups, things like that. So that's why it's the best to plant them in the spring, so you get the best harvest, and they'll continue growing throughout the summer. So if it's too hot, they'll start bolting a little bit. I'll show you example. If it's too hot, some of them will start bolting. They pretty much just stop growing big leaves, and they start growing up like a tree, and they'll have just small leaves, and at the end here they'll produce one stem with the seeds. As you can see, for this red one, quite a lot of them did that. I'm not sure why. The other one over there didn't do it so much. At this point, when it starts bolting, you just want to keep removing the top, because it's just gonna produce all the energy into creating the seeds, and they will stop growing. As you can see, it has a huge stem even. Look at that. It's like a tree over here. And even though these guys can survive the winter and will start growing again fully next spring, maybe it's not a good idea to leave them, because they'll just once the weather hits like over 30 degrees, pretty much already in May or June, they'll bolt much quicker than the newer ones. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna leave these ones here, or if I'm gonna just plant the new ones. I'll see. Just gonna get a little harvest in early spring, and then once they start bolting, we might pull them out and then plant new ones again. They're doing pretty good with things like herbs. Like over here we have some parsley, and over here we planted more dill and parsley. But the problem is, you know, when I planted them, I thought they would grow like this, but this was all covered with the big leaves of Swiss chard and beetroot, and this was all overshadowed by leaves, and these guys in the middle, they had no chance surviving there, and both dill and parsley just got pretty much shadowed and didn't grow at all. Alright guys, that's it for growing the Swiss chard. As I said, it's a super easy vegetable to grow, but make sure you water them good, because as you can see, if you don't water them, they'll just stop producing, and the leaves are not gonna be as nice anymore. So watering them is very important, especially during the droughts. But you don't need to water them more than once per week if it doesn't rain, even in the hottest summer. And again, growing them in a raised bed is much better, because weeding them, it's much easier to pull them out, and it's also easier to pick them. And as all other vegetables, they prefer more looser soil, so you can make your own soil from compost and some looser soil, not a heavy clay like we have down under here. And when you pick them, you want to pick the bigger leaves first, so you have the other ones have a chance to grow as well. Because if only the bigger leaves grow, you know, they're just gonna overshadow the smaller ones. So you always wanna pick the bigger leaves first. And I'm just gonna throw them away. Also the diseased leaves, they're just creating too much unnecessary shadow, you know. Pick all the bigger ones. That's kind of the care that you can do at the same time as harvesting. And I recommend doing the peak period to keep harvesting at least every other day, and then once the weather cools down, like right now, there is no need to harvest at all, just when you need for cooking. But definitely during the peak period you want to keep harvesting as every other day. So let's get into the kitchen to make some delicious mushroom and Swiss chard stroganoff. Hello guys, welcome back to the kitchen. So today we're gonna make a mushroom and Swiss chard stroganoff. So first we have one onion chopped here, and we have about 3-4 cloves of garlic. And now we're gonna chop all the mushrooms that we found in the forest. You can also use your own mushrooms, and it's about 2 kilos of mushrooms. Well, once we cut it, we'll see how much it is. So let's get cutting. Alright, next we washed our Swiss chard, and now we're gonna cut it into smaller pieces. Okay, so we just finished chopping our mushrooms. So these are the butternut mushrooms. They're really good for holding the shape, and they grow really abundantly right now. And we chopped the Swiss chard. So now we're gonna turn on the heat over here on a medium high as always. And now we're gonna saute the onion with the garlic for a few minutes before adding the mushrooms. Alright, as we're stirring the onions, we're gonna add our usual spices. So we have a black pepper here. Now we have a chili. We also have a smoked paprika. Again, you can add more or less, how much you prefer. And at the same time you want to keep stirring it so it doesn't burn to the bottom. A bit basil, parsley, and a little bit of rosemary. And finally we're gonna add some spring onion, dried spring onion. Okay, that's it. Now we're just gonna keep stirring it until the onion gets a bit deglazed and translucent. Now it's also a good time to add a soy sauce or tamari, whatever you have. Alright, now we're gonna add our mushrooms. So we're gonna be slowly adding them. We're gonna add about half of them first, because they'll be expanding, they'll be getting smaller as we cook them. And if your mushrooms are sticking too much to the bottom, you just add a little bit of the water. Don't add too much because we don't want the mushrooms to be too watery. So just add a little bit first and then keep stirring it around. Alright, so once our mushroom got kind of cooked up a little bit smaller, we're gonna add our Swiss chard. So Swiss chard gets small really quickly. So first we're just gonna add this half, and then we'll see how much we can put. So now we added the other part of the Swiss chard. Now we're just gonna keep mixing it. You wanna take a little bit from the bottom to the top so it mixes quicker. Alright, so you can see now our Swiss chard completely wilted down into the mushrooms. So it's important to keep stirring it. Don't go away from this because you don't want to add too much water here. But if you see like your mushrooms, your stir fry is kind of sticking too much, just add a little bit of water, but don't add too much because all the flavor will just get dissolved in the water. So it's important to stay stirring it all the time. And now it's getting the shape. And you can also add a little bit of salt at this time. If you like it less salty, just add less salt according to your needs. And also depends how big of a stir fry you're making. Okay, now we have here 1 cup of soy milk and 2 spoons of cornstarch mixed together. And now we're just gonna add it in slowly. Add half more soy milk as our portion is bigger. So if you have a smaller portion, just add 1 cup, and if you have even bigger portion than us, just add even more. Alright, so we finished the recipe.